Good morning, Mission Wilderness friends. I guess you can still call it morning. It is 11:24 and we're in day 3 of this 5-day, 4-night expedition into the Little Indian Sioux Unit of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. It has been a tough first couple of days. As you know, you've been coming along with me. You know that we set up camp in the dark the first night. You know that we almost set up camp in the dark last night. And you also know that although it's May 18th, it feels more like it's June 18th, and the bugs have reflected that. It was, in spite of all of that, it's still been a really, really good trip. And now it looks as though we've got a pretty good break in the rain. It hasn't rained for about an hour, which has given me time to get out of my tent and to make some breakfast. I made some hot coffee, I made some hot oatmeal, and I've just been enjoying the morning. But ultimately, I'm on a trip, and I am in Cummings Lake. I am deep in the heart of the Little Indian Sioux Unit of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and I've got 2 nights left, and I've got 3 days of paddling left. So the question is what am I going to do? These last 2 days have been far too long, and they have not really allowed me the opportunity to do any camping, so I'm going to try to shorten my days. Now today is a little bit wonky already, because it is almost noon, a very unusual time for me to be still at camp when I'm planning on moving. This is more like a layover day, but I don't want this to be a layover day. I'm going to take off. I want to move on. I want to keep moving through the Little Indian Sioux Unit. So today I'm going to do the portage over to Buck Lake, and then I'm going to paddle across Buck Lake. I'm going to do the portage over into Chad Lake. Actually I should probably finish packing up and maybe check in with you again once we get on the water. That was a 480 rod portage. That is the second longest portage in the Little Indian Sioux Unit, and it took a total of about 3 hours to do a 2-carry portage across 480 rod of portage. That's with very little rest time at all. I took a little bit of a break to have a bar and to eat a fruit leather before I started up again, and then I had to switch out GoPros from the Hero 9 to the Hero 7. Other than that, I was nose to the grindstone, focused on the task, and even focused on the task, it took 3 hours to do that portage. So that's a substantial portage. That being said, the portage is actually a pretty nice trail. There are very few obstructions. There's a downed tree early on in the portage that's no problem to just walk around. There is some mud on the trail that has to be negotiated, some roots that are exposed along with some of that mud, making it a little bit challenging. Probably the most challenging thing of the 480 rod portage is, of course, its length. By the same token, you are rewarded by some really great views. you have the opportunity to go ahead and see a very, very large beaver pond that probably extends for a good 150 rod of the portage. Otherwise, the portage trail is Disney-like. It's like a boulevard. Entirely comfortable, totally easy to walk, just a really, really long portage. By the time you get to the end of this portage, you will appreciate seeing Buck Lake in the distance. I'm on Buck Lake now. I'm starting to feel really good. I think I'm going to camp here if the campsite is open and it's got good wind exposure. Wild horses couldn't keep me from camping there. I think it's about time. It's already, it's late in the day. It's already 4:30, and so it's already a really late camp at 4:30. I'd like to go on to Chad, but not having gotten such a late start today, I don't want to push it, and I'm really trying to get to the point where I'm back on a nice, steady, even keel. So if I can set up camp now and have everything set up by about 5, 6 o'clock, anything that got wet from last night will have time to dry out before tomorrow. And I think I can make it to the trouts tomorrow by a reasonable time. Maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon is a possibility. But for right now, I'm looking to make my home Buck Lake. Oh, what a difference just a few hours can make. Look at this. I am camping on Buck Lake. I've got a beautiful campsite with a point. It's totally exposed to the prevailing wind at the moment. That is the wind that's coming on down this lake. So I've got a spot where the bugs are not that bad. I have a celebratory cup of coffee. I have my tarp set up. I have my tent drying. And now I'm going to enjoy this beautiful lake and this yummy cup of coffee. Buck Lake is just really nice. This campsite is fantastic. I love it. It's got a lot of what you'd want, you know, in terms of the view right off the fire pit. You've got a wonderful view of the lake, and there are 3 points in the distance where you can rest your eyes. There's a shore that's close by, and then it drops back into a nice little bay, and then there's a little point that comes out, and then behind that point there's another little bay, and then there's a ridge, and on top of that ridge there is a mature red pine forest. Below that it looks like some birch trees, or maybe it looks like it's birch trees, and then below that there's some shoreline trees that are actually some trees that are generally on pretty high ground. There's some white pine, and it looks as though there might be some white spruce or balsam fir. I can never tell the difference between balsam fir and white spruce from a distance, because they both have that pyramidal shape. That Forest Service ranger was right when he said that my trip was ambitious. This is a really interesting area of the Boundary Waters. This is the first time I've been to the Little Indian Sioux Unit of the Boundary Waters, and it is it's different, especially this kind of corner, this kind of northwest corner of the Little Indian Sioux Unit is different. And one of the things that really makes it different is long portages and very few campsites. You know, once you come in here, you're kind of committed, and the only way out oftentimes is through. And you know, it has like a kind of destination feel to it. There's nowhere to camp on the Little Indian Sioux River. You have to get off the Little Indian Sioux to be able to camp. You either have to portage the you know, the 200 or so rods over to Burnt Lake, or rather over to Bootleg. I got Burnt Lake on the mind. Or you have to portage the 300 and some odd rod over to Little Trout Lake. Or you have to go up the entire Little Sioux River like I did yesterday in order to get to Cummings. I really do not recommend that anybody try to do that. That was an incredibly difficult journey. As beautiful and as awesome as it was, I was working at maximum capacity for like 6 hours. And that was paddling upstream, that was paddling against the wind, that was portaging 9 times, that's getting out of my canoe 9 times, that is getting it ready to portage, portaging it, loading it back up again, getting back in it, getting out of it. All of that is just a lot of work, a lot of very detailed work, because you can't you can't forget anything on a portage. If you're ever going to get hurt, it's probably on a portage. You know, you're probably going to slip or maybe sprain an ankle or something. So portages by themselves are their own thing. And then finally, when you get to Cummings, you can go ahead and you can camp. This string of portages and lakes that I'm on now, I did 480 rod, and I have 250 tomorrow to get to Chad. There are 2 campsites here on Buck Lake. I think there are probably 2 campsites on Chad. And then you go another 250 rod, you're at the top of the Pine Creek. You've got to paddle the Pine Creek to get to Pine. There are plenty of campsites there. Or do 40 rod to get over to the trout lakes, the Big and Little Trout. You kind of come right there at the connection between the 2 of them. And there are plenty of campsites there. But once you get on that 480 rod portage, you know, you have to make sure that you get one of these probably 4 campsites in this area. I'm just really lucky that right now, I don't know if I'm lucky, it's May 18th. It's really early in the season yet. And so I didn't expect that there'd be a lot of people out here, and indeed, there just are not very many people. In fact, I have not seen one single person or paddler since I started. I guess it was 3 days ago at entry point 9. The only thing I've seen in terms of humans and signs of humans are the planes that were putting out the Bejic fire. I think that fire is out now. I'm almost certain it has to be out by now. The planes really seem to prevent at least damp down the smoke. And then this rain, we had some very, very heavy rain. So this is the first time I've been to the Little Indian Sioux Unit. I usually, almost always, have gone to the Caribou Unit, which is in the northeastern part of the Boundary Waters. And I guess that brings up an issue that maybe not everybody knows about the Boundary Waters. What you can see if you just look on a map is you can see that the Boundary Waters are divided into 3 geographic segments. There's the southwest segment, which is the Little Indian Sioux. That's the one I'm in now. There is the middle segment, or the middle unit, which is the Superior Unit. That's the one that is the largest. That goes all the way from like up by Lac LaCroix, all the way down to Bower Trout, all the way up to places like Seagull and Saganaga. All of that is the Superior Unit. That's a huge unit. And then in the northeast, there is a smaller unit, that's the Caribou Unit. But these 3 units, these 3 segments, these 3 geographic segments, or 3 units of the Boundary Waters, they were created by administrative fiat in 1926. I mean, before that, you had Superior National Forest, which was created in like 1909-ish, right around there is when the core, the nucleus of it was created. But a thing happened in the 1920s that's really significant, and that thing that happened in the 1920s is the invention of the automobile, along with the expansion of the middle class and the popularization of wilderness pursuits. Suddenly people could drive. They could drive to the Superior National Forest, and as a consequence of that, these areas were managed as roadless areas. And from there, you had the beginning of what was called the Superior Primitive Roadless Area, is what it was called. The Superior Primitive Roadless Area, or the SPRA, is what was originally created. And at that time, that's when the Forest Service started managing this place as a primitive area. But what's really significant about that administrative fiat, or that administrative law, is that that was the first time that the Forest Service would add recreation to one of their one of their agency's priorities. But yeah, that's the Little Indian Sioux Unit. That's where it came from. That's where all of these units came from. The Caribou, the Superior, and the Little Indian Sioux Unit, is they came from that 1926 administrative fiat. And thank goodness, because every single person who comes here, every single person who comes to the Boundary Waters, that is another person who wants to preserve it in the way that it is, who wants to maintain it as a recreational area. If you can get a person out here just one time, you're very likely going to get them to come out here for the rest of their lives.